All right, so where have we been? I'll tell you. We've been measuring, we've been modeling, we've been printing, we've been checking, we've been measuring, we've been modeling, we've been printing, we've been checking, we've been measuring, modeling, printing, checking. You get the idea. So when I started, here's what we started with. We had, here's the original from Valve bracket for our power supply. It takes basically the exhaust, sits on the side of the power supply, takes the exhaust air from the power supply, vents it out the side of the case. So, problem is, our new power supply does not have the same vent holes that the old power supply had. So, if you see, when we apply this over the top, there's not a good fit. Not only that, we can't even plug the thing in. So, opened up Autodesk Fusion, first time kind of using the program. A lot of great tutorials on YouTube if folks need help. And we took our first shot and then we printed something out. So this is the first shot, much more basic, as you can see. Let's get these both in frame here. Much more basic, as you can see. The original Valve, this version. So you can see I tried to get a cutout for where the power supply connector would be able to get clearance. I also tried to get the venting to match. So if we flip these over, you can kind of see that now, instead of like this double rectangle, we'll call it, right? Rectangle here for the venting on the old power supply. I tried to get this square to very closely match the square on the power supply venting here. So if we look at how that works, you can see got the numbers on here. Number one, look at how that works. Let's take a look, see. Not too bad, right? Trouble is, this distance here is a little short. I had a couple other things I wanted to change. Obviously, didn't have screw holes in here to mount this to the power supply like this one has here, right? So, not bad first try. I was pretty satisfied. I used forming for this, which that was a bear, I'll tell you what. So, we moved on to trial number 2, which number 2, I learned how to create holes in Autodesk Fusion. I also made a neat little, I thought it was being cute and clever. I'm making a little notch here to compensate for the screw that's going to go into the side. So you can also see I closed this opening that was up here prior and kind of notched out a little spot for this top screw on the power supply. So if we apply this one, oh, better, look at that, much better. What did I not like about this? Do you think I could remember? No, that was about a month ago. But I will tell you, probably one thing was there's a little bit of a gap right here. Don't like that. I wanted that to be closed so we weren't exhausting air out this side here. I think beyond that, it might have just been some location of some screw holes. I don't know if it shows up on camera, but a couple of these, they're lined up pretty well, but then you run into a couple others and not quite lined up as well. So I think I made a few adjustments for that. So we tried again, and this copy number 3. You can see the supports on the bottom got a little bit boogered up during the printing. No big deal. We're printing prototypes here. A difference between 2 and 3. I think I redid the forming because I was trying to get a little bit more. Oh, I remember what it was. I was trying to get a little bit more room for the cable. Because if you notice the original, the cable, after it plugged in, it ramped up the side here, and it kind of went back a little bit. So the thickness of the cable, there was room here. And not only that, the cable clipped in here. So that's what I was trying, because I was not getting that here, right? Basically, the cable just came up sharply here, rested right over the top, and kind of, had nowhere to go, right? It's just getting pushed. So this one was an attempt to make a spot. You can see a little bit of a dip in here, maybe, for the cable to route up. Didn't work out exactly as I wanted, but you'll see that in a moment. Applying this one, screw holes line up pretty well. Again, you can see, maybe, in here, I was able to close that gap a little bit, so not as much venting coming out that side. Where we ended up, actually, on the final iteration, at least as of today, is this. So, valve original here, replacement here. So this was printed, since it is kind of the final, I printed it in a PLA carbon fiber, right? A filament. I think it's Bamboo Labs brand, which, what is it really, Sunlu, or is it something else? I don't know. But anyway, I was pretty satisfied with this overall. I redid the forming again from where I had it last time. There's some very slight changes. You might not be able to tell. Also, I added this ledge here. This is a little bit wider. In the next iteration, I definitely need to make this thicker. You can even see it move a little bit with my finger. It's because it kind of broke. However, the cable does still route up over the top of this and over. So we'll have to make another one where this gets a little bit thicker. I might have to bring this down a little bit in order to make this thick enough and all the cable to have clearance to pass through. So, looking at this on the power supply, here we go. You can see the screw holes line up. Get all the screws in there. We got a pass through for the cable. We have pretty good venting. We'll take it back off. Pretty good venting for the exhaust airflow from the power supply. And you can see again, boogered up a little bit down here. But if we do another print in the future, maybe we can get a little bit better support. So I could try using even different support material. Oh, look at there. I even have a little bit of leftover 3D print material I didn't even take off there. But we'll screw this on, and this will be how our power supply goes in. So next, PCI Express bracket. This was the bracket that was in the Steam machine on the GTX 780 3 gig card that was in there. 3 gig, I believe. This is the bracket that came off the 4070 Super Founders Edition, right? So I had to make a compromise between the two and try to get something similar to the attachment method, which is the one screw here onto the Steam machine case. I also had to get these ports similar to the new 4070 Super. Looks like there's some air venting here on the back for the 4070 Super and some additional 4-screw mounting points for the bracket to the 4070 Super itself. So first iteration of that is here. You can see the number 1 on there. Let's put the NVIDIA bracket for reference here. So maybe I can lay it over the top. I think some of the changes I had here, you can see I marked this off. This was a little bit too long, right? So I'd make this shorter on this side. I also have a little up arrow here. Just, I don't know how else to document this, but maybe I wanted to make this a little bit taller, right? In addition to that, I think some of the screw alignment holes were not quite exactly where I wanted them to be. And of course, I didn't have this little depression here that you can kind of see around the outside of this bracket itself. So just a first try. But we ended up making try number 2. Let's bring this back, actually. You can see definitely shorter, right? From this standpoint, you can see the edge is cut off quite a bit, actually. But you can see here, I started making some additional adjustments, right? This screw hole needed to come in. This screw hole and this screw hole needed to come down a little bit too tall. And I still needed to make the bracket taller yet. So even though I made it a little bit taller in my previous iteration and I thought I measured, and I did measure, obviously my measurements didn't translate well enough. So I need to go even higher just to get a good fit on the case. So number 3 is here. And you can see I brought the screws down. Oh, I brought them down too far because now I got to bring them back up a little bit. So it looks like that was the only adjustment I had here. I think after that, since I was pretty satisfied with the locations of everything, I then started to work on, again, making this little indentation on here just to get a little bit fancy and kind of match up. So number 4 here, this is the back side. So I'll show you the front side, but you can see a little bit of, hang on, let's see here, a little bit of a indentation there. This is actually the side that's poking out a little bit. Sorry, I'm not doing very well getting this on camera, but yeah, indentation, there you go. So popping this over and through. Overall, I think I was pretty satisfied with this one. You can see I don't have any markups on here for any different measurements that I had to make. So where we ended up is, I already have it attached to the video card itself. Again, printing this in the PLA carbon fiber, right? We have this attached to the video card. So you can see the 4 screws attaching the bracket to the card itself. You can see the HDMI port and 3 display ports along the top lighting up. And then you can also see this screw, which will attach to the Steam machine case, which I've actually attached a couple of times just to check the fit here. So pretty satisfied with this all together. I would like to go out and get this outsourced to a metal fabricator shop, but the places I've found so far, a little bit of an investment on that. I'm not sure I really want to go that route. So we'll see, maybe in the future. Right now, pretty rigid, pretty stiff. And then the remainder of the video card, as it's held into the Steam machine, as you'll see later, it's a pretty good snug fit. So as long as I'm not jostling the machine, as long as I'm not shipping it or putting it in a suitcase or whatever that's going to go underneath the plane, whatever, it should be fine. Okay, now some of the more challenging parts of the design and the printing. This plate goes on the very bottom of the case. On the existing Steam machine, the motherboard went here. There's a spot here for a 2.5-inch hard drive, which was not part of the Steam machine, and I don't plan to do one. The GPU actually lays over the top of this portion here, and the power supply's up here, etc. So this is part of the reason it's been a long time since we've had an update, several weeks. What I want to do first is check the locations of all these through holes, get a general idea of the outline, get a general idea of what some of these, what I'll call tracks are. There's many, many different heights on these, as you can maybe tell. So went through, started making outline, started to make some through holes. And we have iteration number 1 here, which, let me flip this over. It'll be a good demonstration for where we're at, maybe. So iteration number 1. And I had to cut this into multiple pieces because it would not fit on the printer itself, which, also learned how to cut pieces properly. So iteration number 1, it was a start, right? So we had a couple of screw holes that were lined up. We had a couple that were not. Looking through here, you can definitely see probably this screw hole not lining up at all. I'm just doing a general fit here to demonstrate some of the purposes. Also up here in this corner, a screw hole not necessarily fitting very well, but overall kind of okay. The reason I had to reprint this is because you can see this section that's missing here. I had to get rid of that. That was a interference fit with the motherboard currently. So let's look at iteration 2. Let's leave this one on here actually. Okay, so iteration 2. Pop this on here. Again, had to cut this one up. Did a little bit of a different cut this time. That way I get some larger pieces and not have to deal with that small piece. Again, ran into some issues, not just with the location, but also the sizing of the holes. So let me show you what I did to help myself there. I started printing different diameter, we'll call them locator pegs, right? So depending on the height of this peg, it indicates kind of a thicker diameter. I don't remember what those diameters were anymore, and no longer matters. But you see some of the shorter ones, it was just a little bit thinner diameter. Some of the longer ones, a little bit thicker diameter peg. So I would start to place these through here in different locations just to kind of start to see and check my alignment. I'm not going to go and recreate all this, but you get the general idea, right? As these pieces were put together, I needed to have a way, since these were in sections and I didn't want to assume everything was aligned before I started printing like a real copy. I needed a way to align all of these screw holes kind of at the same time. So that's what I use these pegs for. So that was iteration 2. Again, not quite right. A lot of alignment issues. So iteration 3, you say I also started to check some of the tracks on the other side. So I printed very thin, I think maybe 1/1000th of a millimeter, maybe 1.5, I can't remember, but something very thin. So, but still kind of the same idea, getting a little bit better with the outline, hopefully. And I'm not going to go through and show all of these and the alignment and such, but you can see iteration 3, not quite there. Iteration 4, ran out of black filament, so I just replaced it with white. Very cool that I could do that mid-print without actually losing the whole thing. Great feature. Iteration 4, very similar. Again, I had printed the trace to understand what the outlines were, kind of get an idea of where the guidelines would end up being. Iteration 4. Iteration 5. I call it 5.5 because I only printed half of it because I think I was pretty satisfied with where the locations were over here, but I was still running into issues over here. And a little bit shorter print, uses a little bit less filament, didn't have a strong need to double check both of these. So I just printed this side just to start to check these screw hole locations here. Iteration 6, printed more of the entire thing again. I also printed a little bit thicker of a track just because I wanted to really start to check these a little bit more against the other side here. So just to kind of see, make sure I had accounted for tracks where I should be accounting for them, give myself, a little visual to double check these, right? So just pop this on here really quick to show you. We're getting close. I figured out a way to print this in 2 pieces instead of 3 as well, which was nice because it was a lot easier. I'm sure I could print it if I were to print it on a diagonal. I shouldn't say I'm sure, but it's likely that I could have printed it in one print if I were to print it on a diagonal on my printer. However, I haven't figured out a way to kind of get rid of some of the support lines that show up, or some of the non-smoothness that shows up in the supports. So I tended not to do that. Iteration 7. You could tell I was getting excited about being close to being finished on this one because I actually glued it together a little bit. So you can see a little bit of glue here. Not a perfect job, of course, but just kind of trying to get the idea again, make sure everything was lining up okay. Had a little bit of an issue in that I was too far over here, right? So not quite there. I don't know why I thought it was good, but I wasn't. Iteration 8, we'll call this 8.5 because again, I realized the errors that I had made. So I only printed half of the bracket since the alignments again were good. So I used it to check this half to make sure I was no longer like way over on this side like I was on the prior. So you can see everything good here. My holes are aligned well. So at this point, I felt confident that I was ready to print the full thing. Let's check it out. All right, here we are with the last, hopefully, last copy. Again, printed in the PLA, carbon fiber, or whatever, what have you. But you can see, let's just pop the backside on here. You can see I had done the dovetail cut. I ended up having to trim off the matching dovetail on this portion to get it to fit. But the good thing is, it actually fits really well in the case when we did a test fit after I was able to get it together. The reason I had to cut off the dovetail is just because the alignment here was not quite, probably the expansion of the plastic. It was basically too big to go into this corresponding hole. So that's this side. Let's look at the other side. Here is our other side. So got the height of the tracks so we can route our cables correctly. Got the height of this, got the height of this for our power supply connector going out the back of the case here. We do have an option to still install a 2.5-inch drive if we wanted to do so. But anyway, yeah, this is the last of the very bottom mold in the case, and I'd call it a success. Okay, so you saw 9 iterations on that bottom mold. What was it? 4, maybe 5 iterations on the PCI bracket. 4 more iterations again on the power supply bracket. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of time. I have a family. I have a job. And I have a tolerance for the amount of effort it takes to get something done. However, it's very important for me to finish this project. I'm very curious and energized about it. Just kind of want to see what we could do as a final product, including the testing of the machine itself. That being said, I determined through some test fitting that I would also have to replace this bracket here, and for one reason. This bump out right here, you can see, it was pushing the GPU towards the outside of the case, and that and the corresponding bracket that goes on top that helps ensure a friction fit into the case. It was actually hitting the side of the case out here, so I wouldn't be able to put the top cover on the case. So I had to redesign this whole bracket just because of this bump out right here. I was bummed. So I did actually spend some time trying to do like 3D imaging with a phone. I used Polycam software, I believe it was called. I tried a couple other software packages. I think at one point I took 1,800 photos of this front, top, all 6 sides, right? I had it sitting, let's see, where was it? I had a stick jammed into this corner here. So it was kind of sitting up on a stick on the ground. The first time I did it, funnily enough, I took a photo of the gravel in the front yard and kind of ignored this whole part. So redid that, put it on the driveway, the concrete driveway. Again, took another 2,000 photos of this. Was not satisfied with the result. So 1, I don't have experience with that software. 2, I think the software still has a little ways to go, or maybe a phone isn't the best method to capture this. I did not have an iPhone handy with me that had a LiDAR sensor on it. Supposedly that could be something that could make a little bit better of a 3D model of a physical part. But at that point, I decided, well, let's bite the bullet. We're going to go in, we're going to model this part again. So fired up Autodesk Fusion and got started. And here is iteration number 1. Iteration number 1, you can see it made some markups on here. This part needed to be wider, right? But for some reason it wasn't allowing the power supply cable. I think it's actually a little bit wider. The power supply cable I had purchased as the extension. It actually routes through the bottom here over to the power supply, just extending it so you can plug it in over here instead of the front of the case. So anyway, that extension wouldn't fit. You can see I made a flip over mark here. There's a little bit of like a tab, we'll call it, I guess, on the bottom of this one. What that does is it helps rest on the corresponding piece below it and ensure it doesn't shift or move, and it just kind of helps you like guide it into place. The way I had printed this tab, I had to move it over a little bit on the next iteration. You can also see the way I printed it, so it was at a little bit of an angle, so the supports came out pretty gummy on the bottom of this one. Also printed it at draft resolution. Draft resolution, I think, is 0.28 for the layers, which some of these other prints that I did do, I also printed draft mode, just to save a little bit of time. I didn't necessarily save filament, because in some cases the draft mode actually uses more filament, but it is a little bit faster. So that's for this portion. Again, I had to print it in half. And on this portion, you can see I made a check mark because I was satisfied with this part. But what do we have to do? At first, I thought I had an issue here, but I decided, nope, that's actually good. I had to make a check mark there. And then up inside of here, I found some adjustments I need to make. Looks like nothing else on the bottom. Oh, actually, I found a gap here. Did a poor job with that, so fix that. And then, oh yeah, I actually cut this away physically to make it fit because I didn't account for that when I was doing the initial design. So I just made a mark here to make sure that when I go back and I edit the model that I would take that out as well. So iteration 1, here's iteration 2. So iteration 2, I found out it might be best to increase this width as well. So I marked that up. I had a little bit of an issue with the location of this hole, so I needed to change that. What else did we have? I think that was about it. Well, I wanted to make this a little bit lower, so this is too tall. So I want to make this a little bit lower, and then I had to cut away some of the features that were originally part of this. This bracket here, this feature, I decided I didn't need it. In addition to on this side, I neglected to cut away to match exactly what was going on with the steam machine itself as well. So I cut that away physically, and then I made a note for myself that I'm going to have to model that out. Right, so iteration 3. I didn't print the entirety of this one because I didn't need to. There's just certain sections that I wasn't satisfied with before. So I reprinted this section here, check the alignment of these holes, also the height of this on the back. Since it rests a little bit on there, I wanted to check that to make sure that was okay. Turns out it was a little bit too tall. This was not printed in the carbon fiber, but printed in black PLA. Again, Bamboo Labs. I think I got a deal, so I'd ordered 6 or 7 spools of it at one point in time when I first got the printer. But yeah, came out pretty nice. And then there's this section I printed here to check what I had changed for the power supply bracket. I think that was pretty okay. This was actually a little bit too short now at this point in time. But yeah, iteration 3. So iteration 4, getting close to final, which is why I printed the whole thing again. I think the only thing I really ran into on this copy was the height here. So this is when I started putting in the case, doing some test fitting. I actually put the GPU in to check the GPU, how that fit along with this. You can see that bump out is gone. But then when I put the top bracket over the GPU, I noticed I had an issue here. So I had to cut away some material here in order to make up for that. And then I found a couple other things that I wanted to tweak a little bit more. So here's where we ended up on the final for this middle bracket, we'll call it. Everything adjusted here for the power supply cable, goes tucked inside nice. There's a little spot here for routing some of that power supply cable and some PCI cables. This spot here, underneath. This is where the USB from the front panel comes through. So a little bit of gap here. You can see I'd cut this part down. I actually went quite a bit further with the cut down just to assure that that bracket not only would have the clearance that I had cut away here in the previous iteration, but I had noticed that it would actually sit a lot nicer. If I cut this portion away, it'll rest up on top. So there were some other areas that I could, instead of clipping over the top of it, basically I kind of wanted to rest on the top of it just to make it a little bit of an easier fit. So final iteration here, we can put it in the case and check it out. All right, so let's start putting the parts in the case. Start with the bottom bracket. I just have to remember how it goes. Let's fit here. There we go. Nice and snug. We'll screw some of these down, but first we're going to put in the motherboard. All right, we have our motherboard for our last build. Let's put it back in here. Nice and easy. Screw this in. Done. So let's see which screws we actually need to use to secure the bottom of the plate. I'm just going to use this top one to identify which ones those are. So looks like both screws here. As well as these three. Yep. So those three. So it looks like we need 5 screws. Put these in. All right, now power supply, we should probably install that, and then we'll install the power supply cable and route it. Yeah, we'll just line up our power supply here. This cable's out of the way. There we go. And secured with one screw over here to the case. Then routing the extension cable. Plug it into our power supply here. Do a general routing. It's going to go in between the power supply and the motherboard, tucked in very securely. Oh, these cables are finicky. Where to hook them. Here, you go right here for now. Or not. You do your own thing, it's fine. Okay, I want to push this a little bit more this way. During test fitting, I noticed I had to get some of the slack for the cable in here, just so we can get a good fit around this corner. So we're going to do that. Nice tight fit here. There we go. Nice. Pull a little bit more of this slack over if we can. So route this cable up over the top here. That way when we put the case on, it's not in the way. Okay, it's gonna be good for now. We'll just leave it here for now. All right, so we're good. Now, need to put the middle bracket on, but before we do that, we need to make sure we have our GPU power cable being routed from our power supply here through, there's a little bit of an opening here, up and able to be plugged into the other side of the GPU here. So let's do that. All right, through the power of movie magic, we have more than one cable installed. We did install that GPU cable. A side note, I could not use the 12-volt cable. There was a little bit of an interference fit underneath this USB bracket, unfortunately. However, we do still have the 8-pin PCI option, and we do have the adapter cable from NVIDIA. So we can always use the dual 8-pin going into 12-volt power connector. So we should be good. Also installed the motherboard power. We installed the CPU power, so we should be good to go. We're gonna do some routing off camera and come back. All right, it is not pretty, but we did manage to get cables secured underneath the USB. Might have to give up the USB for now, honestly. Not enough room for that connector, just with some of the interference fit we had in here. Have to model some other sort of clip to hold the USB in place. The existing clip, there's no way it'll function in that tight of a space. Got these cables routed here. They'll be compressed a little bit, just trying to keep it away from pushing on the memory, which it seems we were successful in doing. Got the CPU cable routed, not a big issue there as well. That'll be fine. Got the GPU cables routed underneath, attached to our adapter. I am very concerned about the end of this. It seems like we have too much of a cable length here, so we might have to look into custom cable coming out of those PCI those PCI power ports from the power supply, just to shorten this cable length and maybe get a better connection here. However, we can leave it off the case when we're doing our testing. I've got the power supply cable here. Obviously, I got both of these mid plates installed. Next step is installation of the GPU. Okay, we'll start with the riser cable. I bought one from a company called Link Up. So let's do the installation of that, see how that goes here first. Smooth this power connector for the front panel, as well as the front panel audio out of the way. Sneak this in here. Easy peasy. A little bit of length on this cable, but that might be okay. Let's see. A GPU with our custom bracket. Installing here. Slides in, and let's put that thumb screw in to hold it in place. There we go. Now, installation of the... It's gonna be long. To the card itself. This looks like it needs to be slid out. Slides into lock. Okay. Probably should install this to the card first and then lay the card in, but I think we're okay. Okay, cable installed. Let's lock it in place. Yeah, let's take this out. We'll install this first. There we go. Lock it in place. Perfect. Install it back in the case. Okay. Base here. Thumb screw. Hold it in place. There we go. Oof. This is a tight fit. You can see though, we do have a lot of clearance here, which is good because this cable is going to bend. Let's see if we can route that off camera. I don't want to do that on camera. I want to make sure that I'm not flexing this end of the cable too much when I'm doing this. So we'll be right back with that. All right, we got the GPU installed, got it routed. We get the cable installed, but as you can see, there's no way the case is going to be able to install with the cable the way it is. It's just too far. I'm not going to be able to bend this. I'd be breaking the cable, which means we're going to have to go custom, which also means we might be done for today. So stay tuned. We'll be back. Hopefully we won't be away as long this time. We'll get some custom cables on order. Then we'll come back. We'll see if we get this thing buttoned up and ready to roll. Thanks for watching.